when you pause, that you can change yourself and the way you walk in. Your energy can be more loving and present. And that's going to make a world of a difference. And so as I was able to navigate that through the end of my teaching career, I noticed a huge difference in my students and their families.
Welcome to Season 16 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I am joined by Misha Safran.
Safran. It depends what country you're in.
Who is the author of, and I hope she'll hold it up, A Teacher's Companion, Centering Empathy and Emotional Wellbeing for Yourself and Your Students. As a trilingual speaker, coach, and consultant, she's developed and delivered a holistic approach to individual and family coaching. She also facilitates workshops and retreats for the home and the workplace. In addition to a master's degree and CA teaching credential, she also holds a professional certified coaching credential from the International Coaching Federation. She has been recognized by the NIH with a CEO award for D.E.I.A training success, and this matters greatly to her as someone who has struggled to fit in during her younger years. That's why she's committed to empowering organizations to nurture belonging in the workplace. Welcome to the show, Misha.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you.
We were just talking about, before hitting record, the pre-show, that you have a podcast and that you're going to resurrect it. And it's going to be the tagline. Tell us the tagline again, because I thought it was so delicious.
Absolutely. Transforming conflict into connection.
Right. And I was saying how necessary and needed that is now. So, let's get to know you besides the bio a little bit. I'm especially intrigued by the question of, you felt some pain as a kid growing up, I guess, and why you feel belonging is so important and connection is so important. So do you mind telling us a little bit about your backstory and what brings you to the work that you do?
Yeah. And it's interesting, now that you say that, I don't know if I realized that that was a component that really played into this as much as it has. But definitely, I was teased a lot. I was short, I was skinny, I was hairy. And I finally learned to say, hey, I'll be warmer than you in the winter. I finally learned to say some things that were loving, but, King Kong's daughter, and I would run home crying to my dad and just felt like I didn't fit in. I was also I was definitely queer. I did not realize it as much until I finally came out in 2017. But I definitely felt that I could not necessarily navigate certain spaces without transforming myself, without metamorphosing, without assimilating and integrating and really tearing who I was down to be a chameleon of sorts in every single different space. And at the same time, it afforded me the opportunity to truly get to know people because I could fit in, but I really didn't fit in long. As I grew up, I really experienced some challenges with social groups, even feeling the odd one out. Even when I had a teaching position, I was the only French teacher at the school. So I didn't have a community of teachers to connect with and identify how to do things with. And the other piece of my backstory is that I've suffered several accidents, and it ended up coming into different disabilities and challenges and medication challenges. So I've dealt with the medical system, the educational system, and law enforcement in ways that maybe a lot of people have and some people never. And that is to have received the energy from folks with anger, frustration, fatigue, and no empathy. And so even then, having to advocate for myself and get 5 neurologists to finally say, oh, the medication you're taking is what's causing the seizures, as opposed to, hey, it's psychosomatic. Not really having the best bedside manner, right? A police officer getting raged at me because I turned left where there was a new sign that you can't turn left there. And I've been driving that for 20 years and just wanting to give me a ticket right away instead of having a conversation, being able to throw it out in court, but because it was new and I definitely, learned. But I think the challenge for me to today is I would gladly take the ticket, but treat me with a little more kindness and compassion. Don't treat me like I am a criminal because I made a mistake. And I think that happens in our relationships too, where someone makes a mistake and now we define them by that mistake, as opposed to having compassion and empathy and getting some deeper understanding. So, all of that to say, that was a backstory to say, I truly believe that we can make this world a better place, one person at a time, by involving ourselves and identifying who they are and
Mm.
getting to know them. We don't have to like people, but we need to accept them. And when we take the time to accept them through empathy and emotional intelligence, we will have a healthier world to live in.
And you make me think of, well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm sorry to hear about the accidents that have happened along the way and the mean kids growing up. But it makes me think of, I haven't read the book. I'm a big fan of Brene Brown's work, and I've read most of her work, but not Braving the Wilderness yet. I don't know if you have, but she basically makes the case that until we can truly be ourselves alone and feel a sense of belonging, you know, all by ourselves, that we can never actually feel like a sense of belonging, even among other people. So all the code switching that you were describing kind of makes me feel like you weren't feeling good in your own skin yet. And that was part of the work of healing so that you could show up as yourself, your true authentic self in other spaces. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that you use code switching because I learned that term when I first started learning languages. So, I have friends that speak different languages, like, okay, we're code switching now. Yeah, but definitely with regards to interpersonal relationships and learning how to navigate. And who am I? I don't know yet. So let me try a little bit of this. Let me try a little bit of that. And now I feel, and I'm glad you mentioned Brene Brown. I also felt very inspired by Glennon Doyle. And I don't know if you read the book Untamed,
Mhm.
but I felt like, okay, I'm identifying more of who I am. And that comes right back to what you just said around being able to be okay with oneself before we really truly can feel that sense of belonging and connectedness with others. And it's a long journey, right? There's so many layers to the onion. How do I appreciate this about me and this about me and that about me when all these multitudes of people have said, ew, that sucks.
Well, I mean, as an educator, I think the fact that you've been through that on your own journey, and that you care so much about empathy in the classroom is so important because apart from parents and peers, I think teachers play an enormous role in the lives of young people and how they feel about themselves. So tell me a little bit about your book, and what you hope readers will take away.
Well, first of all, I will be the first to say that this book wasn't written because I was a perfect teacher.
Hmm.
I made some mistakes. I wasn't always calm and loving in the beginning. I mean, I loved my students, but if I was having personal challenges, they came in the classroom with me because I was irritable, I was frustrated. And so, really, this book is about helping teachers take a pause. There's so much power in the pause, whether it be in the moment or at the end of the day. And basically, I put in 53 stories. And so it's kind of like 53 weeks, 53 stories from my 30 years of teaching. And with each story, there is a lesson learned for me. And then there are coaching questions for teachers to consider. And then after that, there's like a week thing where they get to a week thing. That's a great terminology. A week thing. It's not a week at WEAK, a week for a whole week. They get to navigate each day, identifying what went well the day before and what do I aspire for today for themselves, not, how are the students going to behave or how are the parents going to behave or what's my admin going to say? How are you going to show up? How did you show up and how can you celebrate that? And how will you show up today? And then it helps them identify at the end of the week, what's your goal for next week? And then they read a new story. So
Mhm.
some teachers can take it week by week. Some teachers can say, you know what? I'm going to read one a month. So
Mhm.
it's a consumable. They can write in it, they can journal, they can do a book club. I've actually offered schools that if you buy 25 copies, I'll come in or I'll virtual do a staff development for you so that you can really get an idea of how to really make this work. Because, and I have another one coming out for leaders. The idea is that when you pause, that you can change yourself and the way you walk in, your energy can be more loving and present. And that's going to make a world of a difference. And so, as I was able to navigate that through the end of my teaching career, I noticed a huge difference in my students and
Mm.
their families.
Beautiful. So what a resource. So you want to hold it up again?
I'd love to. I love it because
Educators, grab a copy.
this this image was done through AI.
Get out, really.
Yeah, I had a friend ask me, Misha, how would you explain an image that would work for you? And so I said, I want to serve and be in a heart-centered community with colors as diverse as our people and as intense as our emotions. Oh my gosh. So that's what came of it.
Oh, so for those of you who are listening, go to the YouTube version and catch a glimpse of that stunning AI generated, hard to believe cover. Quite beautiful. Wow, that's really something. That's a whole other conversation that we'll
It
leave.
is a whole other conversation because I do have some challenges with AI, but there's like, yeah, anyways, we won't talk about that today. I have empathy for the people who are struggling because of AI. Let me just say that.
And that will continue. Yeah, that's for the foreseeable future. So let me ask the question, because you have a particular way of seeing empathy. And even in some show notes, you said, ask me what I think about purposeful empathy. So let's start there.
It's funny because you think the term is obvious.
Hmm.
And I think there are a lot of people who, whether they are neurodivergent or they didn't grow up this way, I think that when you think of purposeful, it's like forced, but it's not forced. It's about really, like I go back to that moment I said earlier, pausing and
Hmm.
saying, how can I do this with intention?
Mhm.
I'm not forcing empathy. Oh, Anita, I really got to care about you
Right.
on purpose, right? It's, can I step back a moment and with intention, purposefully feel empathy for you and who you are and what you've gone through and what you're going through.
Yeah.
And so I like to bring in the word intention. And I think that a lot of people will look at this term purposeful empathy, which is beautiful, but maybe not always understand it. And at the same time, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to get to know Anita, right? Because being on purpose also means intentional.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you were describing your own journey as a teacher initially, maybe bringing whatever you were carrying into the classroom, and then over time realizing that you could um, show up in the classroom differently because you were more self-aware. It makes me think of the neuroscience of empathy, which is that our brains cannot extend empathy when we are feeling stressed ourselves. Like it's just not
Absolutely.
possible to our brains, right? So one of the keys, I think, to empathic leadership, whether it's in the workplace or in the classroom, is to first of all have the self-awareness that you're feeling stressed, and then learn methods of self-regulating so that you can then gain access to empathy, right? So that's a bit of work and that's practice, right? That doesn't come just because you decide, oh, I'm going to be all self-aware and know how to down-regulate myself, right?
Right. Right, absolutely. And I want to make it really clear, I'm not judging the title of your book. I'm not judging your podcast title. I'm really doing a call out to people who have a different definition of purposeful or being, like I did it on purpose. I think about that in my childhood. Like I heard that, right? But I think it's really important, as you're mentioning, that we have to build a new neural pathway, right?
Mhm.
We have to really, it's a muscle. And so if we've done things a long time a certain way, it takes a long time to break that habit and build a new one.
Yeah.
But the only way we can do it is to do it repetitively, right? And then I also strongly believe in incrementality. So as we develop these muscles, knowing that we're not going to be perfect right away, perfect makes, progress is practice, and being imperfectly perfect is my goal.
Misha, I'm curious, would you mind sharing a story from the book?
I would love to. Yes, this is week 8. Pause for compassion.
Mm.
My children and I had a rough start to the day, resulting in all of us running late to get out of the house. By the time I got to school, I was frantic and tired from the rush of the morning. Instead of going straight to work, I chose to sit in my car for a few moments and took 3 deep breaths.
Oh, hallelujah.
This gave me pause and space to help remind me that my students may have also had that kind of morning. I accepted my own challenge to let go of the morning chaos and mood. Before your students enter the classroom, pause to think about how they may have experienced their mornings prior to their arrival. It is especially important to have compassion for them. Perhaps they were yelled at for waking up late, didn't have any food available for breakfast, their dog passed away in the night before, etc. Your compassion for them will make it easier to start their school day. Sometimes this comes in the simple form of just accepting each student where they are today. Compassion widens the opening for learning. How can you compassionately support your students this week?
That's powerful. That is powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really happy I asked. That is such a gift. And I can see how powerful that would be for teachers, but I can also imagine you got to write a complimentary book for parents.
Yeah.
I'm touched by that. I'm really touched by that.
Yeah, I got goosebumps and I have tears right now. I relive
Uh,
it.
yeah,
I
yeah,
raised 5 kids, so I would hope that a lot of their teachers would have had that empathy, and some did, and some didn't. Just like medical professionals, police officers, doctors. I mean, yeah. And parents, we need to have compassion for ourselves. There's no book about raising kids that is exactly the fit for each one of us and each one of our kids.
right.
There are great books out there,
Yeah.
but it's a job, it's a journey.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that. So what role do you believe that empathy has? Like, how does it enhance our relationships, not only in our families, not only in our schools, but also in our workplace, since I know you do a lot of stuff in the workplace?
Yeah. So I have 4 components. I call it CAPE. It's put on your super CAPE. And they stand for compassionate communication, assuming positive intent, the principles of inclusion and belonging, and my E, empathy before accusation. And so with these 4 pillars, I guess you would call them, it's an opportunity to slow down, right? When we start speaking to one another, speaking with care, right? That's why it's called compassionate communication. And I realize that a person's intention may have been good, but there's still a negative impact. But if we can still walk in with this idea that perhaps their intention was good, then we can use compassionate communication and empathy for maybe the way they had to show up today to better understand one another. And by doing so, we then have inclusion and belonging. People can more readily converse with each other, more readily be willing to think, oh, you're not against me. My partner and I have these conversations all the time. We're not, I definitely got emotional. I got sorry. um, so, when you did this, it made me feel this way. And I know that that wasn't your intention, but it's important for me to be able to share the impact it had on me. I think if we did that more at home, in the schools, in the workplace, people would have, it would transform conflict into collaboration and connection.
Assuming the best of each other and being curious about, this is how it's landing for me. So you don't want to negate that or deny that or,
Right.
disregard it, but you also want to assume the best of other people. Wow, what a world it would be if we wandered around like that.
Yeah. And I think it's our responsibility to remember that even though we have good intentions, we really might screw up, that our good intentions don't fall well with somebody because we're looking at the world through our own eyes, not through yours or theirs.
Yeah.
And so, what I think is a good intention, somebody else might be like, that was really harsh. That was really cold. That was, whatever it was. And so, being willing to accept that when a person comes to us to share how it landed for them, they also have good intentions.
Yeah.
And that intention is to create a cohesive space where we can now understand each other and grow. It can be super easy to stay stagnant and not change.
100%. Now you mentioned, okay, so the EDI or DEI letters are understood to me, and then we've recently added the B for belonging, which I understand, but you won an award which had DEIA. What does that A stand for?
Really important. Thank you for asking that. And there's actually even another letter. So A is access. I am a woman with a disability, and there are a lot of people with disabilities. And so it can be as far as identifying the needs of those who are differently abled. And it could be through vision, hearing, physical. There are a lot of people in our workplaces who have invisible disabilities. Um, and as people start to be able to speak with love and compassion, like this is what's going on for me, I actually would like to ask you not to spray your desk with that Lysol because it activates my condition. And there's a flare for people to be able to say, yes, absolutely, let's find another solution. And then the other letter that's not there is J, which is justice. And unfortunately, can't really get justice until you work on the others.
Yeah, I have a friend who actually calls it the Jedi.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I have a friend who does the same. Yeah, I love that.
Um, so what would you say to people who want to lean into empathy and even purposeful empathy, but not be consumed by the world's troubles? Because there's just so much, like, and then we enter the empathy fatigue, compassion fatigue, overwhelm. Like there's just, and all our media, social media, everything is just full of these really hard images and ideas. So what would you say to that?
That's a great question. So, first of all, I'll say that some people don't want to practice empathy. They're empathic and they live their lives that way, and they wish they could just shut it all off. I'm one of those, and I think a lot of us that are empathy activists are empaths, right? So, I actually just gave a workshop on, and a friend of mine created a workshop, basically harnessing joy and cultivating your energy for the DEI practitioner. And I did a workshop recently for the empathy practitioner. And it's really all about self care. It's about nourishing yourself, nourishing your soul, putting on your oxygen mask first, and finding ways to disconnect a little bit, detach with love. What's going on in the world is currently really tragic and very upsetting. And the thing that we have to understand as empaths is that we can never really avoid discomfort. That's part of growing. We can create safety, and part of that safety is taking a step back, taking 10 minutes to yourself, taking a day to yourself. And, I am constantly telling people that I know who are in 9 to 5 workplaces, you can have a mental health day. It's okay. When I was doing a lot of, and I still am, but in the beginning phases of my social justice work, I had a friend, a Black queer woman friend, who said to me, Misha, you don't seem resourced. You're not going to help us in this battle, in this struggle, in this challenge, if you're not resourced. Please go take care of yourself. And I was like, oh, no, there's no way. I can't take care of myself. I have to help here and help there. You're not helping anybody, Misha, if you're not resourced. Very direct, very clear. I give the same message to empaths. You've got to take care of yourself to be able to give in a wholesome, authentic, non motivated to save the world way. If you have to resource yourself. And so everybody has to define what that means. For me, I have to get into my 4 elements of joy, which came from the shamans many years ago, which is play. I love being silly. My partner and I play with our food often. Dancing, moving my body and being silly, and singing, which is so music, and then laughter. And finding, if I have to watch a YouTube comedy for, 15 minutes or 5 minutes, even watching the cucumber with the cats or the baby who laughs at the paper tearing, that will make me belly laugh so hard. I am refreshed for another day.
How did you come across those 4 elements of joy through your shaman? That sounds like a very interesting story.
I was actually, when I first started my self-employment, I wanted to be a joy and resilience coach, which I still am, but under the title of something else. And so I was researching, and I found an article online, and I wish I could remember. I'll give it to you when I find it. But it was a beautiful article about the 4 elements of joy that came from the time of the shaman, early years back. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. My family, well, I recently bought a set of frames, and Gio, my husband, and I were looking through it to figure out which photographs we wanted to populate. They were going to be in the living room, which is sort of like a more sophisticated room, I guess, in the house. And Annika, our daughter, who's 8, loves to do silly face photos, right? So we have a bunch of them. And I just said to him, and he's a much more casual, easygoing guy than me. And I said, how about the funny faces? And initially he was like, no, 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 we have nice pictures that we should go with. And I said, no, like really, like hear me out on this. Because I tend to take life too seriously. I tend to work a little too hard. And so we started to pull together these silly, funny face pictures. And that's what's now in our living room. And
Yay!
I'm really happy. Symbolically, it means something.
Yes, honoring the silly. I love it. It's so
Yeah,
important.
I gotta
And
do
people
more of
people
that.
do resist that.
Mhm.
People really resist the silly,
Well,
you know?
part of the journey is also because, oh, so we've talked about a few books now, so we're going to include them all in the show notes so people can get more information. Is a book called Rest is Resistance. Have you
Yes,
heard
I've
of
heard
this
of it.
book?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't quite finished it yet, but it's really making the case not just for self-care, but like intentionally being disruptive to a system that is so oppressive to just rest. And 2 days ago, I actually, in the middle of the afternoon, laid out on my carpet in the living room and just laid there for 10 minutes. And it was like kind of jaw-dropping that I don't do that more often because it really resourced me. It was like the equivalent of having a mid-afternoon cup of coffee where I just rested. I was like, oh my gosh, what a concept.
Yeah. I think that my partner and I did a workshop for couples a little bit ago, and people don't realize how little time they really need to be able to accomplish those 4 elements of joy. We taught couples how to play in less than 1 minute. We taught couples how to emotionally and physically connect in less than 1 minute.
Hey, tell us, what is,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the emotional connection is hugging for 20 seconds, right? Hug each other and just don't rub your arms, don't move, just hold each other really close and tight for 20 seconds. It helps increase your endorphins and the love juices just flow. And some people were like not stopping at the 20 seconds. They were so excited, like, oh my God, I forgot how little time I needed to reconnect with my partner,
Mm.
right? The play, we had dad jokes. You could just tell each other some dad jokes and laugh hysterically at stupid things. We put music on and we did a 3.5 minute song and people got to dance with each other. So it's very easy to reconnect with yourself and with others, but people have this warped sense that it's going to take too long. And oftentimes it's because they enjoy it. And so then they do it longer,
Mhm.
or the anticipation of what do I do and I have to pick it out. And so, really scheduling time, say, okay, 5 minutes,
Mhm.
you know, like I said, we'll sit down at the table, or even while we're cooking. When we're cooking, we'll play with our food, or we'll sit down at our table and we'll make faces out of our food before we eat it. It's, people just resist silly, like, well, that's immature. No, it is exactly what we need as a couple to nourish ourselves, to not be in the serious all the time.
You know, it's so interesting because I was having an exploratory conversation with someone who reached out to me on LinkedIn, and he had an interesting profile. There was no agenda. We just chatted for about half an hour yesterday. And I'm particularly interested in the Inner Development Goals framework. If you're not familiar with it, or people listening, I'll include also that in the show notes. Essentially, there's the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which were launched in 2015 to sort of solve some of the big problems in the world, whether it's plastics in the ocean or gender equality, all of that. 17 goals. And uh, we're 6 years out and we've achieved 12% of the goals, right? Which says a lot. And I know there was COVID in the mix and that slowed us down, but still, like we should, every single country signed on to these goals and we're not advancing nearly fast enough. So the idea of the IDGs, the inner development goals, is to do the work that, like, so leaders, like, it could be you're a leader in your family, in your community, a leader of an organization, doesn't matter like what frame of leadership, but leaders need more courage, or leaders need more compassion, or leaders need more long-term thinking if we're going to achieve the SDGs. So that's the origin story of the IDGs. And I'm interested in writing about them. And he reflected back something interesting to me that I haven't shared out loud yet. But he said, it sounds to me like you're writing for an audience that understands the need for this on the weekends. And then when they're in the week, they're too busy just like, achieving their KPIs. And I think so the reason why that came to mind as you were talking about that is we know play is helpful. We know it intuitively. And so we let like little moments in, but we're so otherwise busy doing the work that our society expects of us that we actually, kind of stop ourselves. Or maybe I'm projecting. Maybe that's just me and I'm just outing myself what's going on in my world. But I think it is so important. It's becoming more and more clear to me that we are really, really serious and seriously unhappy.
Yeah. And and what came to mind for me is a training I did in April, and I was supporting managers to develop communication, the CAPE, to put their CAPE on. And they were saying, we don't have time to talk to our residents. We don't have time to have these conversations. And I asked them, what would happen if you took the time? And one woman stood up and said, I have taken the time. And yeah, she talked my ear off for 2 hours, but I listened to her. I got to know her. She hasn't come back since. She just needed to be heard. I've not had a complaint. I've not had to deal with the tenant or the resident ever since. And so, and this goes back to when I was a high school teacher. I got to a new school. My students had been with multiple teachers, and one period in particular was very far behind. So I took them backwards 2 months in curriculum. The parents were up in arms, the admin was up in arms, the students were up in arms, like, what are you doing? Our kids won't be able to do this, that, and the other before they go. That class was 2 months ahead of all the other groups that year, because we took a step back to identify the missing pieces, the foundation that was crumbling. If we don't do that in the workplace, we take time for play, we take time for connection, we take time to make sure understanding is there and solid, that people have resources, we're shooting ourselves in the foot
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah.
Wasting time. We're wasting time.
Yeah.
And that's all part of empathy. When someone says, I don't know how to do this, giving them the time to find out, what is it that you don't know how to do? How can we support you? As opposed to, you should know this by now. You're an executive of 10 years,
Yeah.
or a child. I remember doing this to one of my little ones. 20 minutes after dinner, I'm hungry, Mom. You're not hungry. We just ate.
Mm.
What do you need, sweetheart? I just want a hug. Oh,
Yeah.
different kind of hunger, right?
Different kind of hunger. Absolutely. Misha, I've got a penultimate question, then the final question of the podcast. This has been truly delightful. Since you care so much about connection and turning conflict into connection, I wonder what you'd have to say about having empathy for those people who have harmed us or hurt us or disappointed us in some way.
Yeah.
She's closing her eyes, folks, taking that question in, not to answer it too fast in case you're not watching this.
So and yeah, for those that aren't watching, I've put my hand on my heart. It's a really challenging space for most people to have empathy for people who've harmed us, who've harmed people we love, or who are doing harm and damage in the world. And what I remind myself constantly with my hand on my heart, because I'm protecting me too, is that those people are sick and wounded also. Hurt people hurt people. And so while I can't solve their woes, while I'm not definitely going to be able to change them, I can have an understanding that perhaps they are wounded, and then detach with love, knowing that there's nothing else I can do, but the better I resource myself, the more I can be in right-sized relationship. And sometimes that means detached completely. So I get to define what right-sized means. Detaching completely from someone who is harmful or gives negative energy that doesn't fulfill me or support me and my goals and who I am as a human. But it's just reminding myself they're wounded. In fact, I asked these managers, when you think of your residents, instead of saying they're difficult, perhaps you could transfer the word struggling. What would that do for the way you think about them?
Goes back to the students you're going to see in the morning. Maybe they haven't had breakfast. Maybe their mom's been, working so hard and just, yelled at them for why they aren't ready for school in the morning. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Misha, I always end my podcast with the same question to my guests, and that is if you can think of a time in your life when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
I'm fortunate. I feel like the reason why I've been able to tap into empathy is because I have been the recipient on multiple occasions. The one that stands out to me, I was I was teaching Spanish and I didn't have a Spanish credential. And so I needed to improve my Spanish. And so I took myself for a month to Mexico. I had people help watch my kids. I was single mom at the time, 3 boys at home. So I had friends coming in to help for my boys. And I went to San Miguel de Allende and I was in a month-long immersion program. And I met the most beautiful people in the different classes. And we took day trips together. And it was a fully immersed trip. I stayed with a family. And I got to know a couple of women, and we were on a bus one day heading back from the trip from Guanajuato. And one of the women said, "I'd love to stay in touch with you. You have such an amazing story. I really value all that you're doing to try to be a better teacher and raise your kids. And you just have a really good heart." And it felt really good to be understood and seen. I was like, "Yeah, of course." So I gave her my address and phone number. And I wasn't home but 10 days after that. And I got a card in the mail. And it was just a check-in. Great to have met you. Here's something to help you and your boys. And it was a check for $10,000. And I looked at it and I was like, is this real? I mean, I was looking around like, am I still in a dream? Like pinched myself. And I read her words again. And she said, "I choose one person every year. And you're the one that I chose. Please take care of yourself first. And then if whatever you have to support your boys." I've never forgotten that. And I found my way to find her phone number. She didn't expect it. And I called her and I just said, I am so moved. Like, I don't know that I can keep this. She says, "You absolutely can." And that's why I didn't give you my phone number, because I thought you would say that. But it was at a time where I needed that uplift. I was able to get my son a computer for high school. I was able to get a bike to exercise. And then we did some fun things, and took a weekend away to visit the Gold Country. And we hadn't had play in a while because I was working 3 jobs. So it was not just the money, but the fact that she saw me and understood me and valued me and wanted me to be able to have the resources to take care of my boys in a way that was special.
That is a beautiful story. And I bet you've looked for ways to pay it forward as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Check, but
yeah, I can't do 10,000 just yet, but yes, I'm working on that. Yeah. I have a joke with a colleague I have a part-time position at a coaching institute, certified life coach institute. And my colleague said one day to the class, "I don't need to make 6 figures. I just need to be happy." I said, "You're right. I don't need to make 6 figures either. I need to make 7 so I can be philanthropic." He's like, "Oh yeah, I like that. Let's do that." Yeah.
Love it. Misha, it was so lovely to meet you and have you on the show. I want to thank everyone who's been watching and listening. And we'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy. Thank you so much for watching or listening to another episode of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Please now consider subscribing or buying a copy of Purposeful Empathy. Thanks again. Have a great day.